Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Sponge Heresy. We are on Legion 2, and I haven't lost the plot yet. Today we are tackling the World Eaters, Angron's angriest boys. And we're going to be doing the majority of it with sponges. Alright, so base coat, I have started with a black rattle can and a zenithal highlight, using a white rattle can. Obviously you can do it with this airbrush, but I want to try and make sure that these videos are catered to people that don't necessarily have an airbrush. First thing we are going to do is we are using our sponges and we are going to be applying some Dryad bark over the top of the model. This is going to do some pre-weathering and add layers of texture and detail to the model as we are sponging these on, and some of this should show through. The next layer that we are applying, and I'm using the same sponge, I haven't cleaned it, anything like that. I'm applying some Skrag Brown over the top, slightly less than the dry bark, but this kind of orangey toned brown is going to really help give off that rust damage effect. It's also going to be really good for, especially on the darker parts of the model where I haven't hit with the zenithal, allowing the white to cover over. Then moving on to the white, I'm using White Scar by Tooth and Coats, and I'm using this fairly watered down with an acrylic medium, and I'm probably about 50-50, and I start sponging this over the model quite lightly so you can see the undercoat and those brown layers, and then applying that in more of a heavy coverage over the top parts of the model where you are naturally going to get more light on the model. The beauty of using sponges or stippling with dry brushes, you can do that as well, is that you are creating an awful lot of texture across the model really quickly and really easily, as you aren't just brush painting that on and hiding the layers below. If you do this with your paints thinned down enough, you get a real nice depth on those miniatures. Then it is essentially a case of filling in the details, and using a small dry brush I am stippling on some Calidor Sky Blue. Being careful not to get this on the white. On the skin I'm using Bugman's Glow, and then I'm using Gunmetal by Vallejo for any of the silver metallics. And for the bronze shoulder plates, I'm using Spartan Bronze by Tooth and Coats. I'm also using the contrast paint Warpstone for the eyelens, and then later on for the plasma pistol. Once that has dried, and give it a decent amount of time to dry, as you don't want to be moving the paint about, which can happen if you are using enamels, I have applied a wash of MIG's Dark Wash over the entire model, other than the plasma coils. And then it is a case of letting that dry. Now, once you've done that and you've allowed it to dry, using some mineral spirits and some cotton buds, I am just lifting off quite a lot of the enamel so it sits in the recesses, and I am paying a lot of attention to the top part of the model and leaving the bottom parts of the model a little more dirty, as obviously if you're trotting across the battlefield you're going to kick up a lot of dust and grime and soot and everything else, so they are going to be a lot more dirty than the top half, especially when you are one of the World Eaters and you are more worried about claiming skulls than you are about cleaning off your white armour. Now again, once that is dried, it is a case of finishing off the details. So what I did to bring the skin up is I've washed it with Druchii Violet, once that dries, I've then stippled on Kislev Flesh. Again, watered down about 50-50 with acrylic medium to make the skin a little more blotchy, add a little more of that extra texture, and then I've gone in with Warpstone Glow, the contrast paint for the plasma pistol. Now, obviously, this being a World Eater, I've kept it quite dirty. However, if you did want to push some of those highlights a little bit more, it's going to be a case of going back in with your chosen colours, so your white, or depending on if you're doing your shoulder pads or whatever else it is, and just stippling that on in the areas that are going to reach the most light. You don't need to do any edge highlighting with this, as the enamels really make those edges pop as they darken down all those areas and sit really nicely in the recesses. And there you have it. Nice, quick, simple World Eaters to you to get onto the battlefield and cause havoc. I haven't put any blood effects on this, obviously you could, and I haven't added any kind of more battle damage. And again, you could play around with an awful lot more mediums, add some kind of rust tones for a little more visual interest, etc. In terms of basing, I have used Kraut Cover, Grimdark, which is essentially a soil and stone mix, which has got some added lovely looking skulls and bits of bone and stuff like that, which is really ties it in with the rest of the model. I didn't have a pigment powder, which I potentially would have liked to have included on the legs that matched the base well enough, so I didn't put any on, but obviously you could then add on some pigment powder on the bottom halves of the legs just to really kind of solidify that trudging across the battlefield look. Next up, we've got the really fast boys, the Sons of the Storm, the White Scars. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace!